Thank you very much, Don. And first of all, I'm very honoured to be invited to speak here this morning. And I say this everywhere I go, because any place is better than Mountjoy. But it's not really, because for the last 21 years I've been in Mountjoy, which is a long time, I suppose, looking back. It's certainly as long as any life sentence. And for 36 years I've been in prison, which is equally a long time. And I honestly wouldn't change it for the world. I often say that if I had my life to live all over again, which I haven't, but if I had, I would certainly be delighted to start all over again. Probably do everything different, as most of us would often in life, but it's not that, it's how we do it, but I certainly want to do it again. Because of what it has brought to me, and that's what I just want to share with you. When I go out speaking, I just simply speak from my own experience and what I've been in touch with in life and what people I have met in so many different ways, from so many different backgrounds. And I suppose what that has brought to me, and I suppose it has helped me to get to know myself first, which I say to people is the first thing you have to do, is to get to know yourself, and maybe to be so grateful for what we get in life compared with other people. I come from a little place called Bansha in West Tipperary myself, and when I was a child growing up in the late 40s and early 50s, Bansha was very well known because it was a little parish where Canon Hayes was. And many people here would remember Canon Hayes and know what he stood for. He was the founder of an organisation called Muintin. And he was a Limerick man as it happened, but he spent some years in Tipperary town as a curate, and then he came to Bansha as parish priest. And what he stood for was community. That's it. He believed that you had to live it. He wasn't obsessed with any other part of life or about the Gospels or about praying or Mass or anything. He believed that you had to actually live it. And that's what it was all about. No need to preach your virtues if you live by them. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us. It's like when somebody says to you, "Do you love me?" And when you say, "I do," it's just, what do you mean by that? And what are the preconditions? Because sometimes, you know, it is easy, as I often say to people, it's easy to love somebody, it's easy to be with somebody when it's all downhill, when they're successful and everything is going well. It ain't so easy when it's uphill. And I suppose prison is one of those places. So I want you to think for a moment. I'm sure there are some people here who have been there, to have actually been to prison, either as somebody who is serving time or somebody who has to visit, as Don said. Don visits mainly in a professional capacity or as a befriender. But I just want you to think of maybe the toughest call of all for a parent, or one of the toughest calls of all for a parent, is to be called upon to visit someone very close, a son or a daughter, a husband or a wife, or someone very close who has been imprisoned. Just want you to think about that. If that call came to your door, how would you respond? And would you be able to be there when you'd be most needed, when it wouldn't be popular at all, when a lot of the friends that you'd have in life would be the biggest hypocrites in real life when something like that would befall you? They would be the gossipers. They would be the people who would stigmatize you and your family. They would be the people who would disown you. So I always say my heroes in life are the mothers and fathers, particularly the mothers, because they never fail. The mothers who come week in, week out to visit someone very close to them in Mountjoy. For me, that is it. That's living it. It's not a popular thing. It's not something you'll be boasting about. It's not something that you'll get any accolades for. But they're there. And they're there because I believe that they really do love the people they're visiting. And that's what, for me, it's about. It's about doing the unpopular thing when it's the right thing to do. And I'd like you to think about that. Because today in particular, we live in an era where John O'Donoghue, the writer and philosopher, once wrote, we live in an era where we pay homage to image. It's all about image. How we look. How we spin out the best side. Whether it's truth or lies, it doesn't matter. It's about image. It's shallow. It's cosmetic. And if we all think about it, we live very much that sort of a life. We have to project a certain image outside. and how difficult it is sometimes for us to be ourselves. Sometimes we reach the stage where we don't know who we are or what we really stand for. There's so much spinning and so much image creation. And so I just think that it's meeting people, I suppose. Canon Hayes used to say people needed, a community was a group of people of all different backgrounds, the young and the old, the rich and the poor, the educated and the ignorant, and so on. And his philosophy was that if you didn't, and if you weren't in touch with each element of society, you really didn't know what was going on. So it is important for poor people to be in touch with the rich, but equally important for the rich to be in touch with the poor. And I suppose that's one of the big weaknesses that I find in this modern society, is that there's people living in Ireland today and they just don't know what it's like to be poor. They just don't know. You can drive through Dublin, for instance, or Cork or Limerick 100 times, and you might never come across poverty or suffering or human misery or human brokenness. And you could go off to another country and say Ireland is a wonderful place. We're all rich today. We're all affluent. We're all well off. And equally, I could bring you, and many, many people here could bring you to hundreds of different places throughout Ireland where there's real poverty. And just to maybe put a little preamble in here, poverty isn't all about money either. It's not all about the materialistic stuff. Of course, poverty means for some people no food, no bed, no clothes, no social status. But I know other poverties, many other poverties as well. The poverty of people being unable to forgive, the poverty of people not knowing when they have enough, the poverty of shopping. And so, what I want you to think about for a moment now, especially those who have materialistic status and social status, I want you to think for a moment, because I know we have some people here who fall into this category. I want you to think for a moment, if you were homeless tonight in Dublin, what would it feel like? Just what would it feel like to be homeless in Dublin tonight? I think about that the odd time. I'd say, I wonder what would happen if I was homeless. Where would I go? Who'd help me? And for me, that is what it's about. This is what life is about. And for me, that's what all the Gospels are about. It's about living it. And I just want to say to people, we're very quick sometimes to condemn others. And in a way, the more secure we are and the higher social status we have ourselves, the more arrogant we are. Why don't they do what I did? We've all the answers. I hear people saying, well, I was poor one time, and look at me now. And I say, well, we'll put a statue up to you. Being homeless. Always think of home. How much we underestimate the value of home. I want people to think for a moment now of the home they were born in. And I want to put a little preamble as well, that for some people, home wasn't a very happy place. Some people remember home as a place where they suffered or where they were neglected. But for the majority of people, home is very special, and there'll be never any place like it. The place you were born, that home. Just think about the psychological strength that home gives you. You'll never feel better, you'll never feel more comfortable, you'll never feel more secure, you'll never feel happier than when you're at home. Home where I was born. And I just want to say to people how lucky and fortunate we all are that we have those memories. Because I know people that don't have them at all. And I suppose it's being in touch with people like that and people who have seen the other side, the people who struggle in life. And how does that happen? How is it that some people have mansions and other people are homeless? And does it happen at birth? And I'd say it doesn't. I'd say every baby is born fairly equally. It's what we do to them and the way we have structured our society that causes people to go two different directions. There's no doubt about that. We're all created the same, but our lives are so different because we as a community, as a group of people, as a society, we dictate it that way. What about all the wonderful children that are born with wonderful talents and grow up never being even aware of them? Why is that? And these are the sort of issues that I feel that are at the very core. The child is born with all the talents. And then the child is born with all the talents and given the opportunity to develop them. And once they're developed, given the opportunity to put them into action. I call it opening doors of opportunity. So I want to tell you a little story now about a baby. I often tell this little story because I came across it in real life in Mountjoy. And it just illustrates, I suppose, the little theme that I want to talk about this morning. Life. When I am weak, I am strong. And for some, it's amazing the strength they have. That strength they have when everything about them is weak. So this young girl was in Mountjoy a few years ago, 19 years of age. And she was in for a very small offence of shoplifting. And while she was in, she was spent a couple of weeks or months, and then she was released on what we call temporary release. And she went off, and she was to come back again the following Friday to sign on again. But she failed to return, and the legal term for it is unlawfully at large. So she remained unlawfully at large for months and months and months. And then out of the blue, one evening, just out of the blue, she arrived back herself. She got up one day and she obviously said, well, what will I do today? And then she said, I'll go back to Mountjoy. It is very difficult to be able to empathize and put your feet into somebody's life like that. But anyway, she did. And so the next day I had a little job to do. I had to deal with it because she was in breach of the regulations, the rules. She was unlawfully at large. And part of this little process is to have a written report read out to her, which I did. So I read out this report saying she was so many hundreds of days absent. And then the final little part of the process is to say to her, what have you to say? And I suppose I want to share this with you as well. Very important, the other side of the story. Today we often only hear one side. We're not interested in the other side. Should we know already? We have our minds made up. I just want to share with you that in every human situation where there's a person involved, there's two sides to the story. And unless and until we hear both sides, we're in no position to decide. And so I said, what happened? Well, she said, it's a long story. But I said, tell me anyway. Well, she said, I got pregnant since I was here last. And I said, no, I didn't. And she said, I did, and I didn't know I was pregnant. That was the first little thing that struck me. We boast about our educational system. We tell everyone around the world how wonderful we are as a country in educating our young people. And he was a 19-year-old who didn't know a most fundamental piece of knowledge. She didn't know she was pregnant. Then she said, because I was a heroin addict, addicted to heroin, I continued on my addiction. And most people here have no idea what it's like to be addicted to heroin. No idea. But it's the worst scourge, it's the worst cross that any human being can be burdened with. The cross of addiction, and particularly heroin addiction. Because they live rough, they don't eat, they don't look after themselves in any way. And I believe, and I say this often, it destroys the person in every way, physically, emotionally, psychologically, and morally. And so she said, I continued on a life of heroin addiction. Just imagine the little baby. Just imagine that little baby struggling in that mother's womb for nutrients and nourishment that would just keep it alive. There wouldn't have been much to fight about. And so she said, eventually I went in to have my little baby, and it was born 2 months premature and weighed 3 pounds weight. And she said, when it was born, the nurse took it away immediately and put it into the incubator. And then she said, time later, she came back to me and she said to me, do you want to see your little baby? And at this stage, she became very emotional. She cried and she said, what I did to that little baby, I'll never forgive myself for. And so she said, I went down to the area where the incubators were, and I saw my little baby, tiny little red-skinned baby, tubed up and wired up. And she said, because I was going through heroin withdrawals, so too was my little baby. And she described the little baby for me inside of the incubator. She said it was so tiny, and it was shivering and shaking so violently that it was moving around the incubator. And she said the nurse used to open it every few minutes and place it back into position. And she said that went on for 3 days. I want you to think about that little baby now. That little baby is probably 3 or 4 years old now. Little girl. We see that little baby maybe sometimes in the future sitting on O'Connell Bridge perhaps with a little box. Will we stop to ask her little life story? Will we be interested? Will we ever cross our minds that perhaps there's a story to her life? Just imagine her going before somebody in this hall looking for a job in 15 or 16 years' time. And just supposing the employer said, where were you born? I should maybe in an incubator, 3 pounds weight, shivering and shaking with drug withdrawals that I was totally innocent of. And I suppose that's just one of many experiences that I have had that has opened my eyes and stopped me being judgmental. And that's the thing I want to say. Above all, is our judgmental society of 2004. We're wonderful. We're so vain and so self-righteous and so hypocritical. I come back to what I said at the beginning. It's about living it. It's about doing it. And you live it through your contact and your treatment and your reaction to other human beings. That's what I believe. It begins and ends in how you treat others, how you see others. I go back to homeless people, addicted people, sick people, broken people. How do we deal with them? How do we respond to them? I see people coming to Mountjoy, spending many years there, doing their very best and better than their best. Really being remorseful, really regretting what they did, begging often for forgiveness. And still they're never forgiven. And when they leave to worse than when they came in, irrespective of what they do. So it's about love. Every human being is the most important basic human need in every human being, the need to be loved. And what does that mean? It just simply means to be accepted as I am, warts and all. And we all have warts, by the way. Every single one of us. I've never met the perfect human being yet, and I'm not optimistic. And because we don't have that perfect species, obviously nothing in our community, nothing in our society is perfect. And I have often said that within every human being is the potential to do good, and within every human being is the potential to do bad. You just look at the traffic in the morning and road rage, and you know that behind everybody is that potential to be aggressive, that potential to do bad. And I suppose then, money. We live in a consumer-driven society. So I want to say to you that Christmas Day this year was Thursday, and Friday was Stephen's Day, and then Saturday. And I went down to get the papers where I live out in Kilmacud on Saturday morning about 10 o'clock. And when I arrived down at the little shop, or close to the little shop, I saw a huge queue of people, 10 o'clock on the day after Stephen's Day. Hundreds of people queuing up. And I wondered, I couldn't understand what was happening. And then I saw it. DID. The Christmas sale. And here they were in their hundreds, shivering with the cold, queuing up for a bargain. That's poverty. That's real poverty. David Beckham, a few years ago, I read a bit of his story, and they said he had 9 of the biggest cars that money could buy parked in his avenue. Imagine the poor old dilemma that David has every morning. And you know, most of us would be very like David Beckham if we had the money. Accumulating stuff up, snapping up the bargains, bringing them home. I actually will want them someday. So I suppose what I'd be saying after today, what I think it is important after today for everybody here is that you go home and you make a difference. You make a difference to somebody else's life. That's the challenge. Did I make a difference today? Did I help somebody today? Did I think of somebody else? Did I enrich somebody else's life in a meaningful way? Edmund Burke, 250 years ago, he said, and I quote him, if we, as a society, as a people, he said, if we command our wealth, we shall be rich and free. If our wealth commands us, we shall be poor indeed. I wonder if poor old Edmund came back to Ireland today. What would he say? Would he be proud of us? Would he endorse our attitude and our philosophy, our way of life? Or would he be disgusted? So it's not about money. Money is wonderful. It's the way we use it. It's learning, I suppose, all of us learning to know when we have enough and saying so. But have you ever met anybody yet? Where is that species that says, I've enough? Give it to somebody else. And then finally, time. Time. Time has become money. We are too busy. The number of people that say to me, I'd love to be involved in volunteerism, but God, I'm too busy. Time. Time is my money. And I'm sure all the homeless people that are here this morning and all the people that are at the bottom of the pile, I bet every one of them would agree with me that the most important thing of all for them is to meet somebody who has the time to recognize them and to talk to them. The time. That's what service is, in my opinion. the time for somebody else, the time to hear their stories. Don't forget my little baby. If we want to know that little baby in the future when it grows up, we've got to hear her story. And it's only after hearing her story that we'll have any idea where she's coming from. And every human being has a story, every one of us. And you know something, much of that story we wouldn't share with anybody. We'd be too embarrassed. That life story, that life experience, the good and the bad and the ugly. And so I want to finish off with a little poem somebody sent me a number of years ago, and it's linked into doing it. It's like Ireland today in the old rugby. It's no good talking about it. It's no good aspiring it. You have to go out and do it. And it's the very same, I believe, for people who say they're Christians. You have to live it. And it ain't easy, in case anybody might think I'm underestimating it. It's damn tough to live it. It's damn tough every evening to look in the old mirror and say, did I prove I was a Christian today? Is there any evidence after the day that would convict me if it was an offence? Would I be on my way to Mountjoy? I'm afraid most of us would be found not guilty through lack of evidence. And so I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a few thoughts and words with you. And I want you to reflect on this little poem now, and I just hope I remember it, because I think it's powerful. I don't know who wrote it because she never told me, but it's powerful, and it's called Example. And I want you to just to reflect on it. And it goes like this. I'd rather see a lesson than to hear one any day. I'd rather you walk with me than to merely show me the way. The eye's a better teacher and more willing than the ear, and counsel is confusing, but example's always clear. The best of all the teachers are the ones who live the creed. To see good put into action is what everybody needs. I soon can learn to do it if you let me see it done. I can see your hand in action, but your tongue too fast may run. And the counsel you are giving may be very fine and true, but I'd rather get my lesson by observing what you do. Thank you very much. Well done. Okay. Well done.